Daniel barely slept that night. The small apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the old wall clock Emily had insisted on buying years earlier. Lily was asleep in the next room, clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had sewn by hand before illness had taken away her strength. Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table with a notebook, sketching the layout of the abandoned generator room from memory. Something refused to make sense. Machines failed. People made mistakes. But labels didn't appear years after equipment supposedly became useless. Someone had intentionally disconnected the main relay in 2014, even though the board insisted the motor had completely failed in 2012. Why disconnect something that was already dead? His thoughts were interrupted by small footsteps. "Dad!" Lily stood in the doorway, wearing oversized blue pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "You couldn't sleep either?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "You look worried." Daniel smiled gently. "Just thinking about work." She climbed onto the chair beside him. "Mom used to say thinking too much keeps problems awake." Daniel laughed softly. "I miss hearing things like that." "So do I." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lily reached into her pocket and placed a smooth white pebble on the table. "I found this at school. It's beautiful. I think it's lucky." Daniel looked at her. "You keep it." She pushed it back toward him. "No." "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups need luck more than kids." Daniel closed his hand around the little stone. It wasn't valuable, but somehow it gave him strength. The next morning he arrived at Westbridge Technical Academy before sunrise. The campus was almost empty. Morning fog drifted lightly across the football field, while sprinklers quietly watered the grass. Daniel unlocked the maintenance office and began searching through decades of storage boxes, invoices, inspection reports, repair requests, old maintenance schedules. Most were ordinary, until he opened a dusty filing cabinet hidden beneath a stack of broken shelves. Inside were folders arranged by year. He quickly located 2012. The file labeled Generator Failure Investigation was missing. Only an empty space remained between neighboring folders. Someone had removed it not long ago. The dust pattern around the empty slot was noticeably cleaner than everything surrounding it. Daniel carefully photographed the cabinet with his phone. Before closing the drawer, another folder caught his attention. It was labeled Emergency Energy Audit, 2011. Inside was a technical inspection completed only months before the alleged failure. He read every page carefully. The conclusion made him stop breathing. Primary generator motor remains in excellent operating condition. Estimated remaining service life exceeds 20 years with standard maintenance. Daniel read the sentence again. Excellent operating condition. Only months before the board declared it beyond repair. Someone had lied. The office door suddenly opened. Carl entered carrying a toolbox. "You came early." Daniel quickly closed the folder. "So did you." Carl noticed Daniel's expression. "You found something." Daniel hesitated. Then he handed him the report. Carl's face slowly lost color. "I haven't seen this in years." "Is it authentic?" Carl nodded. "I remember when this inspection happened." "Then why did everyone say the motor failed?" Carl looked toward the hallway before lowering his voice. "Because that's what we're told to say." Daniel stared at him. "Who told you?" "The board." "What if it wasn't true?" Carl sighed heavily. "There are questions people stopped asking a long time ago." Daniel leaned closer. "I'm asking them now." Carl looked genuinely frightened. "You have a daughter." Daniel frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It means you should think carefully." Before Daniel could respond, Carl quietly walked away. The warning felt sincere, which made it even more unsettling. Later that afternoon, Daniel received his first anonymous phone call. The voice was calm, almost polite. "You're opening doors that were closed for good reasons." "Who is this?" "Some stories should stay finished." "You have the wrong number." "No." A brief pause followed. "We have exactly the right man." The line went dead. Daniel looked at his phone. Unknown number. His heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. That evening he drove home in silence. He didn't tell Lily about the call. Instead, they cooked spaghetti together, while laughing about how every attempt at homemade bread somehow ended up looking like strange rocks. For a little while, life felt normal again. After dinner, Lily disappeared into her room. When she returned, she carried a worn family photo album. "I want to look at Mom." Daniel swallowed hard. Together they turned page after page. Camping trips, birthday cakes, beach vacations. Emily smiling despite the chemotherapy scarf covering her hair. Then one photograph made Daniel pause. It showed Emily standing beside an elderly man wearing maintenance coveralls. Lily pointed. "Who's that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Mr. Henry Lawson." "The old man who fixed everything?" "That's right." Henry Lawson had been Westbridge Academy's maintenance director for nearly 30 years. He had taught Daniel everything about electrical systems when Daniel worked summer jobs as a teenager. Kind, patient, honest. Then, 12 years earlier, Henry had been publicly blamed for neglect that supposedly destroyed the generator. His reputation vanished almost overnight. Daniel suddenly realized something. If Henry were still alive, he might know the truth. The next afternoon, Daniel drove nearly 40 miles to a quiet neighborhood outside the city. Henry's modest white house looked carefully maintained despite its age. Fresh flowers surrounded the porch. Bird feeders hung beneath tall maple trees. Daniel knocked gently. After several moments, an elderly man opened the door. Henry Lawson looked older than Daniel remembered. His shoulders had bent slightly. His once dark hair was now completely white, but his clear blue eyes remained sharp. "Daniel." Henry smiled with surprise. "I haven't seen you in years." "It's good to see you." They sat on the porch drinking iced tea. At first they talked about ordinary things. Family, work, life. Then Daniel carefully asked, "Can I ask about the generator?" Henry's smile disappeared. For a long time, he simply stared across the yard. Finally he spoke. He had taught Daniel everything about electrical systems when Daniel worked summer jobs as a teenager. Kind, patient, honest. Then, 12 years earlier, Henry had been publicly blamed for neglect that supposedly destroyed the generator. His reputation vanished almost overnight. Daniel suddenly realized something. If Henry were still alive, he might know the truth. The next afternoon, Daniel drove nearly 40 miles to a quiet neighborhood outside the city. Henry's modest white house looked carefully maintained despite its age. Fresh flowers surrounded the porch. Bird feeders hung beneath tall maple trees. Daniel knocked gently. After several moments, an elderly man opened the door. Henry Lawson looked older than Daniel remembered. His shoulders had bent slightly. His once dark hair was now completely white, but his clear blue eyes remained sharp. "Daniel." Henry smiled with surprise. "I haven't seen you in years." "It's good to see you." They sat on the porch drinking iced tea. At first they talked about ordinary things. Family, work, life. Then Daniel carefully asked, "Can I ask about the generator?" Henry's smile disappeared. For a long time, he simply stared across the yard. Finally he spoke. "I wondered if someone would eventually come." "You knew?" "I knew someone honest would notice." Daniel reached into his backpack and removed the 2011 inspection report. Henry quietly nodded. "It's real." "So the motor wasn't destroyed?" "No." "What happened?" Henry looked directly at Daniel. "The motor never failed." Daniel felt the world become strangely quiet. "What?" "It shut down because a safety relay disconnected during a voltage surge." "That's reparable." Henry nodded. "It took less than an hour." Daniel stared in disbelief. "Then why replace the entire system?" Henry looked toward the empty street before answering. "Because replacing it was worth millions." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "The board approved the contract." "Yes." "And someone benefited." Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood slowly and disappeared inside the house. When he returned, he carried an old metal toolbox. From inside, he removed a faded envelope. "I've kept these for 12 years. Inside were handwritten maintenance logs, repair notes, signed inspection forms, and one photograph. The picture showed the generator operating normally 3 days after its alleged catastrophic failure. The date stamp was clearly visible. Daniel looked up. This changes everything. Henry nodded sadly. I tried to tell people. No one listened? They listened. Then why? They chose not to believe me. Daniel noticed tears beginning to form in the old man's eyes. I lost my career, my pension, my friends, my name. My wife died believing everyone thought I was dishonest. Daniel couldn't find words. Henry looked at him with quiet determination. If you're going to fight this, he paused, make sure you're fighting for the truth, not revenge. Daniel carefully folded every document back into the envelope. I promise. As he stood to leave, Henry called after him. One more thing. Daniel turned. The motor still works. Daniel smiled. I think you're right. No. Henry's expression became serious. I know I'm right. He reached into the toolbox one last time. There, wrapped in an old cloth, rested a small brass key. The original control cabinet key. Daniel accepted it carefully. I thought the lock had been replaced. It has. Henry smiled. But there's another access panel almost nobody remembers. Daniel looked at the key. For 12 years, it had waited for someone willing to uncover the truth. As Daniel drove home beneath the bright afternoon sky, he felt hope growing stronger than fear. He finally had evidence. He had a witness. And he had the key to the machine everyone claimed could never run again. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching his visit from a parked vehicle across the street. As soon as Daniel drove away, the observer picked up a phone. He found Lawson. A calm voice answered, then moved to the next step. What about Carter? A long silence followed. Finally came the reply. Make sure he understands that some motors should never be restarted.